If one guard moves, the world will remember nothing else. That was Commandant Riedel's final instruction before the funeral procession began. But as the coffin of Pope Benedictus VIII appeared beneath the ancient arch of St. Peter's Basilica, humble, unadorned, just as he had requested, one man did move. His name was Lucas Marlowe, a sergeant in the Swiss Guard for 14 years, known for his precision, respected for his silence, feared for never ever breaking formation until now. His polished boots broke the line. The halberd in his hand shifted. The crowd went silent. Something was hidden beneath his uniform. Not a weapon, not a symbol, but a letter, sealed with the papal insignia. Why had the Pope entrusted it to him? Why reveal it here, before the eyes of the world? Before we uncover the truth, help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can continue honoring untold stories of courage and legacy. Click subscribe, tap the bell, and comment below. Should loyalty always mean silence? Or is there a time to step forward? Stay with us until the end, because the final 28 seconds of this funeral changed how the Vatican will be remembered forever. Let us begin. The square was silent. Not even the wind dared to move as the cypress coffin reached the foot of the basilica steps. Lucas Marlowe stood like a statue, shoulders square, halberd gripped tight, blue and gold uniform sharp as a blade. Every eye, every lens, every soul present was fixed forward. And yet, something stirred beneath his chest plate. A weight, not physical, but spiritual. It was the letter, folded carefully, sealed with wax, pressed over his heart. 2 nights before, it had been handed to him by Father Alessio, the Pope's longtime personal secretary. The priest's hands trembled as he said, "His Holiness wrote several letters before he passed, but this one was for you. He said you'd know when the time was right." Lucas hadn't slept since. He had read it 20 times, and each time the words etched deeper into his soul. "There will come a moment," the Pope wrote, "when tradition will demand your stillness, but love will ask you to move. If that moment comes, don't hesitate. Let the world see that faith is not silence, it is courage." So when the choir began to sing and the incense began to rise, Lucas stepped forward. One boot, then another. The marble echoed beneath him like thunder. Heads turned, a gasp rippled through the crowd. A cardinal's hand froze mid-blessing. And still, Lucas moved, toward the coffin, toward the memory of the man who had seen something in him that no uniform ever could. He was no longer just a guard. He was the messenger. And the world was watching. The moment Lucas Marlowe reached the casket, time seemed to stall. The marble beneath his boots, the chants in the air, the distant toll of a bell. They all faded, swallowed by a silence so complete it was almost sacred. In the stillness, Lucas lowered his halberd with one fluid motion, sliding it to his left side. His right hand moved with deliberate grace, as though every joint had been rehearsed for this singular purpose. From within his breast pocket, he withdrew a simple cream-colored envelope. The papal seal gleamed faintly in the cold morning light, instantly recognizable to those close enough to see it. Some thought it was part of the ceremony. Others knew instantly it wasn't. He stepped closer to the coffin, his movements military in precision, but weighted with something more personal, something deeply human. Then he knelt. For 14 years, Lucas had stood without fail. He had never broken formation, not once. And yet now, before the world, he dropped to one knee. Gently, almost reverently, he placed the envelope atop the casket, just below the crucifix carved into the wood. No words were spoken aloud, but those nearest heard a whisper in it, "Per il tuo ultimo viaggio," for your final journey. That phrase, simple as it was, cut through the crowd like a prayer. In the perfect acoustics of the square, it echoed gently, reaching ears it was never intended for. A woman near the front began to cry. A bishop's eyes welled, blinking hard beneath his glasses. Somewhere a camera zoomed in, but the broadcasters had no words to describe what they were seeing. Lucas rose slowly, 3 paces back, halberd upright once more, his face carved in stone. The entire breach, from first step to final posture, lasted exactly 28 seconds. But it would be remembered for generations. The Swiss guards, trained to stand motionless even during bomb threats, barely blinked, but inside they were reeling. One younger guard whispered a silent prayer. Another looked on with open awe. The ripple effect was undeniable. Something had changed. In the crowd, a murmur built like distant thunder. Not chaos, not outrage, just breathless wonder. But behind the scenes, within the basilica walls, the response was very different. High above, on a discreet balcony near the choir loft, Cardinal Matteo Leonetti, the Vatican's master of protocol, whispered into a secure microphone. Inform the college, we have a deviation. Elsewhere, Father Alessio, the man who had delivered the letter to Lucas, stood hidden behind a column near the colonnade. His eyes were closed, lips moving in silent prayer. He knew this moment was coming. He just didn't know how it would feel. As the funeral resumed, incense drifting through the air like ghosts of ancient saints, no one dared remove the letter. It remained on the coffin, untouched, unacknowledged, but unmistakably present. A papal farewell unlike any in recorded memory. Backstage, in the Vatican's underground command center, multiple screens played the feed from international broadcasters. Analysts, officials, even members of the Swiss Guard leadership watched in tense silence. The question wasn't, what had he done? It was why. Commandant Riedel stared at the monitor with clenched fists. Marlowe just broke 5 centuries of ceremonial law, he muttered, in front of the entire world. But no one moved to stop him, and more telling, no one dared retrieve the letter. Why? Because deep down, they all knew. Whatever was in that envelope, it was real, it was sacred, and it was meant to be seen. Hours later, once the service concluded and the coffin was lowered into its marble tomb, the letter remained sealed in the Pope's final resting place. A symbol of unspoken truths and a final act of trust. The Vatican's ornate machine of tradition had been gently but undeniably disrupted, and not with protest, but with dignity, with reverence, with love. That night, news anchors across the globe speculated endlessly. Who was the guard? Why did he move? What did the letters say? But inside Vatican walls, a different storm was brewing. Lucas Marlowe was summoned, not to be punished, at least not publicly, but to explain, to justify, to stand trial not before a court of law, but before tradition itself. And what he would say next would not only shake the chamber of cardinals, it would challenge the very soul of ceremonial duty. When Lucas Marlowe stepped out of formation, he didn't just violate a rule. He shook the bedrock of Vatican ceremony. But as dusk settled over Rome and the scent of incense still lingered in the basilica air, a deeper question hung in the corridors of the Holy See. Was he wrong? 3 hours after the funeral, Lucas sat in a small, windowless chamber beneath the apostolic palace. The room bore no symbols, no flags, just 4 chairs and the weight of history. Seated across from him, Cardinal Fabien Darcy, prefect of the Congregation for Divine Worship, Commandant Riedel, whose silence was heavier than condemnation, and Archbishop Vittorio Benassi, known for guarding tradition like a soldier guards a gate. In the corner, like a quiet shadow, stood Father Alessio, the man who had delivered the letter. The interrogation began not with accusations, but with a single question. "Where did you move?" Cardinal Darcy asked, voice steady. Lucas didn't fidget, he didn't blink. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded sheet of paper and placed it on the table. "This is a copy of the letter," he said softly. "The original now rests with His Holiness, as he wished." Darcy adjusted his glasses. As he read aloud, the words carried through the room like a quiet tide. "To the one who stands where others are told to be still. If ever your heart aches louder than the rules you serve, know that I gave you this letter not to defy tradition, but to remind it why it exists. Benedictus expest." The silence afterward wasn't awkward, it was sacred. For the first time in decades, the most rigid defenders of ceremonial precision were confronted not with rebellion, but with purpose. Commandant Rydell finally spoke, breaking the stillness. "This is unprecedented," he muttered. "You violated protocol. You disobey centuries of discipline." Lucas nodded once. "I did, sir, but I did not disobey the man I served." Archbishop Benassi leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Do you believe emotion should override tradition?" Lucas met his gaze directly. "I believe that without emotion, tradition becomes hollow, a statue without breath, a page without meaning." No one replied, and that was the moment things shifted, not just in the room, but in the hearts of those seated within it. Cardinal Darcy set down the letter. "What the world saw today," he said, "was not a breach, it was a revelation." He looked at Riedel and Benassi, both visibly conflicted. "We train guards to disappear, to become part of the background. But this letter, this act, it reminded us that behind the uniform stands a soul." Lucas inhaled slowly. He had expected judgment, dismissal, perhaps even disgrace. But now, in the stillness of that small chamber, he saw something different in their eyes. Recognition. They weren't speaking to a disobedient soldier. They were speaking to a man who had dared to feel something sacred. As the meeting closed, Cardinal Darcy offered no formal verdict, only this: "There will be no public rebuke, but you understand, you cannot return to ceremonial duty." Lucas nodded. "Yes, Your Eminence. That uniform was never just fabric, it was trust. I knew what it would cost." Father Alessio finally stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Lucas's shoulder. "Knew, too," the old priest said softly. "Where the Pope gave you that letter, he knew exactly what it would demand of you." Lucas didn't answer. He didn't need to, because in that moment something fundamental had changed, not just in how the Church saw Lucas Marlowe, but in how it saw itself. The Swiss Guard was no longer just steel, stance, and silence. It had become human, and the Vatican would never be the same again. 3 mornings later, before the sun had fully risen over the Vatican gardens, a single envelope was slipped under Lucas Marlowe's door. No meeting, no official address, just a plain notice marked with the gold seal of the Secretariat of State. Effective immediately, Sergeant Lucas Marlowe was reassigned, removed from ceremonial service, and transferred to a place few outsiders had ever seen: the Apostolic Archives. The letter gave no reason, it needed none. Everyone inside the Vatican knew what this meant. The archives sat beneath the Vatican Library, a sprawling labyrinth of stone corridors, steel vaults, and ancient silence. Its shelves held over 50 miles of historical records, papal bulls, forgotten letters, sealed correspondences, and handwritten homilies never delivered. It was a place where the Church buried its memory, and sometimes its secrets. When Lucas arrived, no one greeted him with a salute or smile. His new supervisor, Monsignor De Luca, barely looked up from his parchment. "You'll patrol the perimeter of the archive vaults?" the old priest said. "No bags, no pens, only pencils. This isn't a punishment, son. It's just containment." Lucas nodded. "Understood, Father." Gone was the brilliant uniform with gold buttons and ceremonial halberd. In its place, a simple black security coat, an ID badge clipped to his collar, and a duty belt, with nothing more than a flashlight and silent radio. But what surprised Lucas most wasn't the silence. It was the peace. For the first time in years, he walked halls where no cameras followed him, where no eyes expected perfection. And as he passed rooms lined with scrolls from the 10th century, manuscripts inked by long-dead saints, and secret letters between popes and monarchs, he began to sense something he hadn't in a long time. Purpose, not the kind that demands applause, but the kind that simply exists. One evening, 2 weeks into his new post, he noticed a small, sealed case tucked into an unmarked shelf. It bore only 3 words: "For the next guardian." With permission from Monsignor de Luca, Lucas opened it slowly. Inside, a collection of handwritten reflections by Pope Benedictus X. Thoughts never published, some scribbled in the margins of sermon drafts, others composed during long sleepless nights. In one entry, the Pope had written, "We teach our soldiers to guard the church's gates, but who guards its soul? Perhaps not the loudest, perhaps not the most obedient, but the one who remembers why the gates were built at all." Lucas read that line 3 times. Then he sat in the reading chamber, pencil in hand, and underlined it softly. He began returning nightly to that corner of the archives. He didn't read for duty, he read to understand. He wasn't just guarding pages now. He was guarding legacy, a spiritual inheritance passed not through dogma, but through quiet courage. Day after day, Lucas moved through the archives like a shadow, barely noticed by others, but beginning to notice more himself. Details, meanings, deeper truths that ceremony had never revealed. In silence, he began to find his voice. One afternoon, while escorting a visiting bishop through the pre-conclave records chamber, the man stopped and glanced at him. "You're the one from the funeral, aren't you?" "Yes, Your Excellency," Lucas replied. The bishop didn't lecture him. He didn't offer praise either. Instead, he said, "It mattered, what you did, not because it was dramatic, but because it reminded us that we're not just curators of ritual, we're caretakers of meaning." Lucas said nothing, but in that moment, something within him settled. This wasn't exile, it was elevation, just in a different light. Months passed. The world moved on. The funeral faded from headlines. But deep beneath the Vatican, Lucas Marlowe kept watch, not over crowds, but over memory. Not in pageantry, but in purpose. And though the letter he once held now rested forever within a sealed tomb, its message had found a new home. In him, the archives had a way of slowing time. Days blended into one another, not from monotony, but from stillness. And in that quiet, Lucas Marlowe began to unravel pieces of himself he never knew were tied so tightly. The man who had once marched with a halberd under the hot sun now walked softly among parchment and memory. No one saluted him here. No one whispered exemplary. And yet, every page he guarded felt alive, with voices that still mattered. One night, as a spring rain tapped gently against the stone above, Lucas came across a letter from Pope John X, the Third, and the 5th Earls, written not to a cardinal, but to a gardener in Castel Gandolfo. It read, "You trim roses as I shape hearts, but never think your work is less sacred. God is found in all things done with love." Lucas paused, the words resonating deeper than he expected. He realized how much of his life had been about doing things perfectly, polishing boots, holding still, reciting orders. But now, for the first time, he was starting to understand what it meant to do things meaningfully. Each day, after his patrols ended, he'd sit in the private reading room with a pencil and notebook, something he never did before. He began to write. Not reports, not records, but reflections, simple thoughts, questions he'd never dared ask, prayers that had waited years for room to breathe. Where does silence become cowardice? Is obedience without love truly virtuous? Would I have stepped forward if the world weren't watching? There were moments, of course, when doubt returned. Late at night, alone in the vast chamber where scrolls whispered of history, he would wonder, did I dishonor the guard? Did I make it about me? But then he'd remember the Pope's handwriting, and that final sentence burned into his memory. Faith without love is architecture without light. That line became his compass. Weeks turned into months. Lucas started to form quiet bonds with others who worked in the archives. Not scholars or diplomats, but simple people. Barco, the elderly janitor, who'd served through 5 papal transitions. Sister Alina, a Polish nun tasked with cataloging centuries of forgotten music. Louise, the soft-spoken security clerk who used to sing old hymns while cleaning the stairwells. They didn't ask him about the funeral. They didn't have to. With them, Lucas felt more seen than he ever had in the grandest halls. Because here, no one bowed. They just listened. One Friday, Lucas found himself in the guard's private chapel, alone. The same place he once polished his boots, now quieter than ever. He sat at the back pew, not to pray, but just to sit. And then, without even realizing it, he wept. Not out of guilt, not from shame, but because for the first time in 14 years he wasn't performing a role. He was just a man, wounded, faithful, still learning how to carry both. That evening, a younger guard named Thomas approached him in the corridor, barely 22, eyes wide with uncertainty. "Sir, I was there. When you stepped forward, I was 2 rows behind. Can I ask, were you afraid?" Lucas looked at him, really looked. "No," he replied softly, "but I was grieving. And sometimes that's the braver thing." Thomas nodded, hesitated, then whispered, I think it changed something for all of us." Lucas gave him a tired smile. Then maybe it was worth it. He returned to his reading room that night, opened his notebook and wrote, "Growth doesn't always look like rising higher. Sometimes it looks like going deeper." And indeed, that's exactly what Lucas Marlowe had done. Not broken, not banished, but transformed. Late one Tuesday afternoon, as golden light poured gently over the Vatican gardens, Lucas Marlowe walked the stone path that led from the apostolic archives toward the barracks. He moved slowly, not because he was tired, but because for once in his life, he had nowhere to rush to. His new post had become a kind of sanctuary. No spotlight, no salutes, just paper, prayer, and a quiet kind of grace. But that afternoon, something different unfolded. A group of children, maybe 20 of them, trailed behind a tour guide near the fountain. They wore matching uniforms. Austrian school kids, wide-eyed with wonder, necks craned toward the sky. One boy, no more than 10, with curly dark hair and glasses far too big for his face, lagged behind. Lucas noticed him immediately, the way he stared, not at the dome or statues, but at Lucas. The boy stepped toward him, uncertain but curious. "Are you him?" the boy asked in halting Italian with a strong German accent. "The guard who moved?" Lucas blinked. He hadn't heard those words in weeks. "I am," he replied gently. The boy looked around, lowering his voice. "My father said, you weren't supposed to." "He's right," Lucas said. "I wasn't." "Were you scared?" Luke thought for a moment. Then he knelt slightly so their eyes were level. "No, I wasn't scared. I was certain." "Right. But what if everyone said you were wrong?" Lucas smiled faintly. "Sometimes Doing what's right means being misunderstood for a while. The boy looked away, unsure. But just before he turned to run back to his group, he paused again. Did the Pope really write you a letter? Lucas's voice softened. They did, but some things stay between friends, even after they're gone, especially then. And with that, the boy ran off. Lucas stood alone once more, but never lonely. Later that evening, as shadows lengthened across the ancient stones and candles flickered inside the chapel, Lucas returned to his small desk in the corner of the archives. He opened his notebook. He turned to the final page, and he wrote, "I did not serve the church for applause. I did not break formation for attention. He moved because he trusted me to carry something forward. A moment, a message, and sometimes that's all faith really is. Stepping forward when no one else will." The world may never fully understand what happened that day in St. Peter's Square. The Vatican never issued a statement. The letter was never published. And Lucas's name slowly faded from public conversation. But inside those hallowed halls, among whispers of popes and saints and centuries of silence, one truth remained. He had stepped forward not to change the church, but to remind it why it existed. In the years that followed, younger guards would sometimes ask about him. They'd hear fragments of the story, a rumor, a headline buried in time. And when they stood in perfect stillness beneath the sun, they'd occasionally glance down the marble paths, wondering what it would take for them to move. And in that quiet wondering, his legacy lived on. Back in the archives, Lucas kept reading, kept walking, kept protecting what mattered, not the uniform, but the spirit behind it. And though no one played music for his shift, no incense burned for his devotion, he was, in every way that mattered, still standing guard. Not at the gates of the Vatican anymore, but at the gates of meaning. Let me ask you something. If you were in Lucas Marlowe's position, what would you have done? Imagine it. You're standing in perfect formation. 50,000 people watching. Millions more through screens across the globe. You've trained your entire adult life to be invisible, precise, disciplined, silent. Then, tucked beneath your uniform, over your heart, rests a letter written by a dying pope, a letter only you were meant to carry, and perhaps deliver. You know the rules, you know the expectations, but you also know what he asked of you. So, do you step forward, or do you remain still? It's a question we don't just face in uniforms or marble squares. We face it in our everyday lives. When a friend needs help, but pride tells us to stay out. When a child makes a mistake, and the rules say punish, but the heart says understand. When tradition says one thing, but love whispers another. If I were in Lucas's shoes, I'd like to think I'd step forward too. Not for defiance, not to be seen, but because there comes a time when the cost of silence is greater than the risk of truth. We all carry letters in life, messages from those we've lost, promises we've made, convictions we've kept, buried under what will they think. Lucas didn't just carry a physical letter, he carried a legacy, and when the time came, he delivered it with grace, humility, and reverence. So what's the lesson here for all of us? Maybe it's this: discipline matters, but without compassion, it's just performance. Tradition is powerful, but its true purpose is to serve what's sacred. And most of all, sometimes the holiest thing we can do is move when everyone else stands still. In a world that often shouts, Lucas showed us the strength of a quiet conviction. In a time obsessed with image, he reminded us what it means to act from the heart. And in an institution bound by centuries, he opened a small door, just wide enough to let love in. Now I want to hear from you. If you were Lucas, if you stood with that letter pressed to your heart, would you have stepped forward, Or would you have followed the rules? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments. From 1 to 10, how would you rate this story? Did it move you? Did it challenge how you see obedience, tradition, and quiet courage? Your voice matters, especially in a community like this. And if this story touched something deep in you, if it reminded you of a moment in your own life where you had to choose between silence and truth, please take 1 second to like this video, comment, and subscribe to Guard Royals. We're working to reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps us bring more untold, soul-stirring stories to light. Together, let's honor the ones who quietly carry what matters. And maybe, just maybe, help each other learn how to step forward when the world expects us to stand still. We'll see you next time, right here, where stories live and truth still whispers.